In 1958, I was a student in Stage 1 education at the University of Canterbury. Around mid-year, a tall and handsome lecturer appeared in the large lecture hall. He was introduced to us as Dr. John Small. I did not know then that he had just returned with Dell and baby daughter after doctoral studies at Ohio State University. Nor could I know that this man would be a central figure in my life ever after. When he took up as a lecturer in education, he was in his early 30s and already had had an impressive career. Born in 1925, he went to primary school at St. Joseph's in Ashburton and then on to Ashburton High School for his secondary education. He then entered Dunedin Teachers College, concurrently taking papers at the University of Otago. He began his teaching career in several country schools, country service being a requirement of teaching at that time. While teaching near Hoarata, he passed 2 units of history at the University of Canterbury. Having enrolled at the university, as he put it himself, he read the 4 or 5 textbooks over and over each year and made careful notes based on the pattern of previous examinations. For the 2 papers of Stage 1 and the 3 papers of Stage 2, he said, I attended no classes, had no contact with lecturers or classmates, and neither wrote nor received a single letter or assignment. In 1950, he moved to Christchurch, where he taught at Christchurch East School and finished his undergraduate degree. He cycled to and from his lodgings at New Brighton to school and university. He also played rugby, at which he was reportedly very good. In 1951, as John tells it, Professor Henry Field stopped at John's desk on his way to a lecture and said in a loud whisper, "You are going to do an MA next year, aren't you, Mr. Small?" Dutifully, John took time off in 1952 and 53 to complete his masterate, after which he took a position as temporary lecturer at the university. During that year, 1954, he met Dolores Woodley, with whom he would have a long and beautiful marriage and produce 7 wonderful children. On the completion of his master's degree, he won a coveted Fulbright fellowship, and a week after their wedding, Dell and John set off for Ohio State University. John intended to do a master's degree in school counselling before taking a position in the new psychological service set up to serve New Zealand schools. Instead, as he had already done a master's degree and thesis at Canterbury, he was admitted to the doctoral program in guidance and counselling. In 1958, he returned to Christchurch, and after filling in for a time for Professor Philip Lawrence, during which, as I have reported, he lectured to the relatively young Ivan Snook and perhaps 100 other Stage 1 students, he joined the permanent staff of the Department of Education at the university. 5 years later, our paths were to cross again, very significantly. After I had completed my undergraduate work, I was looking for a topic and supervisor for my thesis. Dr. Small, as I still knew him, suggested a topic and offered to be the supervisor, which I leapt at. Both were inspired choices. He was a knowledgeable and patient supervisor with a fine appreciation of English writing, and the success of that thesis owes much to his gentle guidance. On the successful completion of the thesis, he asked if I had ever considered going on to a doctorate. Coming from a working class background, with parents who had not gone beyond primary school, such an idea had never entered my head. I could hardly believe that I had a master's degree and was a qualified teacher. He persisted and wrote on my behalf to 2 American universities, both of which accepted his nomination and offered me entry to their doctoral program and a monetary fellowship to support me and Josie, whom I had recently married. In his heart, he may have liked me to join Bernard Merle, his former supervisor, at Ohio State, but believing it to be in my own interest, he recommended that I accept the offer from Professor Harry Brodie at Illinois. This, of course, was typical of John's huge heart. What counted were my interests, not his. During our time at Illinois, I kept in touch with my mentor, who at one point wrote that I should feel free to address him more informally. Thus, with great difficulty on my part, Dr. Small became John. A few years later, repeating John and Dell's own history, Josie and I returned from Illinois with baby daughter Catherine, and I joined the staff of the Education Department at the University of Canterbury. Thus my mentor became my senior colleague, and he was very significant in my adjustment to life as a lecturer. In my first year I had a very heavy teaching load and almost went under. John came to my rescue and took a block of lectures for me in the final term. It was a lifesaver. Our friendship also blossomed, and Josie and I came to know John and Dell and their wonderful children. We had many happy times together, socialising. Our children remember these years with deep affection. In John's early years at the university, he was, as was typical of the time, required to teach subjects other than his own speciality. He lectured on New Zealand education, educational theory, and educational measurement, as well as in a specialised field of educational counselling. Later, staff like myself were fortunate in that we were allowed to specialise. Thus, in our achievements, we stand on the shoulders of staff such as John, who carried the load for us, and then, oh so graciously, moved over to allow us in. I acknowledge in particular the wonderful way in which John handed over to me, his former student, the Stage 2 course in educational theory, which he had taught for many years. At Canterbury, there was as yet no real tradition of research and publication, either in education or in any subject, including the sciences. This was soon to change. John himself helped to lead the way, publishing a book, Achievement and Adjustment, in the first year of university, which established his reputation for the study of factors influencing student success. He was also involved in the provision of psychological services in the community around Christchurch. Along with other members of the department, he helped with intellectually and physically handicapped children, juvenile delinquents, as well as remedial work with reading and speech. In those days, unlike today, universities saw themselves as serving the community. But his heart always lay with counselling, in which he had specialised in Ohio, and he soon got his big chance. In 1973, at barely 6 weeks' notice, the newly elected Labour government asked that up to a dozen school counsellors be selected for training. John wrote himself, "The department accepted the request, perhaps too hastily and with insufficient stipulations. Yet those who taught the course were well qualified to do so. The team, led by John, included Bob Montai, Brian Keeling and Brian Tuck. Together they established an esteemed program which has contributed much to the New Zealand education scene and has been imitated at other New Zealand universities. In the early 90s, I set up a review panel for Massey's counselling program. Our counselling team were delighted when John accepted the invitation to join that panel. He was clearly the oldest statesman of school counselling in New Zealand. With Bob Montai and Anne Munro, John wrote a book, Counselling, a Skills Approach, which went through 3 editions, sold an amazing number of 30,000 copies, and is still being cited today. His achievements brought him promotion at the university and recognition beyond it. He had a period as head of department and sat on the professorial board. He served 2 terms as president of the New Zealand Psychological Society, was a member of the Avonside Girls High School and official visitor at Sunnyside Hospital. He had periods of overseas leave at the University of Leicester and Washington State University. He continued with his own personal study too, taking classes in French and German at Canterbury and completing a diploma in second language teaching at Massey University. During these years, he and Dell were both very involved in progressive movements in the Catholic Church in the energising days after Vatican II. They were fully involved in the Christian family movement and led the New Zealand delegation to the Laity Commission in Rome in 1967. Under Bishop Ashby, John was chair of the Diocesan Pastoral Council. All these activities were all part of John's concern for the well-being of others. He hungered for justice in all things, and of course was often disappointed, even shocked, by the venality and self-seeking of those with whom he had to deal. After we moved to Palmerston North in 1981, we saw John and Dell rather less, but it was always a delight to visit them in Christchurch, to recall shared values, to experience their warm hospitality, and at times to stay in their lovely home. We enjoyed hearing of the fulfilling lives of their children, and they liked to hear about ours. We were delighted that they were able to join us in Palmerston North for 2 weddings, Catherine's in 1997, John's in 2002. After his retirement in 1988, John capitalised on his Massey diploma and went to teach English in China. On his return, he continued to work assiduously when, after more than 40 years of labour, he might well have rested. Rather incredibly, he wrote 4 more books: on Long Beach and its surrounds, on educational studies at the University of Canterbury, on Kashmir School and its community, and on a century of soccer in Canterbury. He also wrote a biography of James Height, the distinguished rector of Canterbury College in the 1930s, a history of the Celtic Club in Ashburton, and many more pieces on a variety of subjects which called on his historical scholarship and his fine grasp of English literature. In the early 2000s, I abused our friendship by asking him to read and criticise the manuscript for my book, The Ethical Teacher, which he did generously and meticulously, to the great benefit of the final work. This constituted yet another personal debt. He remained intellectually and socially committed until health and the earthquake forced him into full retirement. I hope that those Nelson years brought him the peace he so deserved. As the New Zealand poet Ursula Bethel wrote, "We have remembering hearts." Today, sadly unable to be at the funeral as we had planned, Josie and I remember all those lovely gatherings with the Smalls. We recall in particular the 20th wedding anniversary celebrated at Rochester Hall and the get-togethers at Alfred Forest. The interactions between our 3 and their 7 children, and the keeping in touch at a distance, which has been a feature of the past 33 years. We also honour John for his outstanding academic career, his contribution to school counselling, his dedication to family, and his commitment to justice. With sadness, I say farewell to Dr. Small, my mentor, with whom my academic career would not have existed, to John Small, my senior colleague, who did so much to help me as an academic, to John, my friend, who has enriched my life and that of my family. As Josie put it recently, we owe John everything.